Back in Ireland, by early summer, I'm more enthusiastic than ever to search for large whales along the edge of the continental shelf. And maybe, if we're extremely lucky, make a match with some of the whales I photographed on the mid-Atlantic ridge, which could actually confirm a migration route. This will be my second summer of battling poor weather conditions to reach our deep Atlantic waters. I know from the Azores how difficult it is to find whales in the open ocean. And in Irish Atlantic waters, there are a fraction of the number of whales in a much larger area. I decide to try and harness the elements of our ever-present North Atlantic wind and sail the 100-kilometre voyage. Unlike a rib, we can sleep on a sailboat and spend up to a week out there. But the shelf edge covers 10,000 square kilometres, and it seems impossible to know where to search. Dr. Joanne O'Brien has studied whales for 15 years in Irish waters. She's joined me on our trip out and has some interesting insight into how I might find large whales in the deep Atlantic.
If we look back at very early records, along European coasts, whales have been here for thousands of years. There's reference in very early Christian writings of whales and dolphins. One of the funny stories is the story of Brendan the Navigator and actually saying Mass on the back of a whale. We come across all different references to sea monsters, and they were most likely whales and dolphins. The big area that fills our knowledge about whales and dolphins is true whaling records. You know, along the west coast of Ireland, we have a number of areas where Norwegian whalers would have set up site. These areas would have been close to the continental shelf so that they could very easily access those waters to be able to hunt whales and dolphins. And it's those records that give us very early information about the kind of numbers that were present and the species present for Ireland. So if we look back, we can see that there were records of blue whales being caught, records of humpback whales being caught, fin whales. So all those species that we would recognise today, they were hunted to such critically low levels.
And then the moratorium took a couple of decades or a few decades to come in, so we're looking at the 70s, even into the early 80s in some parts, yeah. But now, it strikes me, that's 30, 40 years ago now, you know, is there any recovery of any of those stocks because of that?
If you're looking at animals that live for 80 years, you know, we are going to have to wait a while in between that intermediate period before we start to see that recovery, and I think that's what we're seeing now.
Joanne feels we should search for blue and sperm whales in the areas where the whalers operated along the shelf edge 100 years ago. That's still a vast area, but Joanne has another idea to help us locate the animals.
Sound is so important to whales and dolphins. It's their primary sense. So just like we rely on, you know, our sight to cross the road, to drive, to do all of these things every day, sound to them is that sense. And, you know, they have evolved to be able to optimise that sense more so than any others.
Using an underwater microphone, Joanne shows me how to listen to the underwater world.
See the low frequency stuff here?
Yeah.
That's definitely shipping sounds.
Wow.
We're monitoring here within our hearing range. What we're looking for are clicks, some whistles, but also if we had sperm whales in the vicinity, their clicks are lower frequency than others, so we'd be able to record those as well.
Yeah, so that's all shipping.
I begin to really appreciate the importance of sound in the ocean. The primary medium for whales and dolphins to communicate with each other and to hunt for food. We sail on towards the deep Atlantic and the shelf edge. And some hours later, a container ship sweeps past us, the source of the shipping sound we'd heard earlier. And it leads me to think about the impact of man-made noise in the ocean. During his very early dives in the 1940s and 50s, my great hero, Jacques Cousteau, described the underwater world as the silent world. But Cousteau's silent world existed before mass consumerism created the scale of goods shipping we have today. and before the advent of seismic surveying. Seismic surveying is a way of searching the ocean for oil and gas reserves, using an array of air guns, which are towed back and forth across an area, firing air blasts down to the seabed every 10 seconds. These blasts can be almost twice as loud as a jet engine. In recent times, there has been an increase in seismic activity along Ireland's shelf edge in the search for more oil and gas resources.
That sound does have an impact, and
It can travel, presumably, for great distances, and their acoustic, their ears can hear over huge
Exactly.
distances. So
Sound travels 5 times faster than it does in air, and that's why whales and dolphins have evolved to use sound in water, because it's just an absolutely efficient medium for them to be using. We have the protection of these animals as our responsibility, and we need to keep monitoring that, and we need to be carrying out more studies to find out, not just from seismic surveys, but all sorts of man-made sound that we put into the oceans. When we look at things now, okay, we might have the absence of whaling, but we have to take responsibility for the sounds that we are actually putting in. The requirements that we have on food and all sorts of resources, they have to come between different countries through shipping, and the sound that shipping can put into an environment can also have impacts on cetaceans. So
I haven't been out in the deep ocean quite a bit. The size of some of these container vessels now is just getting bigger and bigger, and of course with the rise in consumerism there's more and more traffic and more demand. But it's interesting to say, you know, we talk about the oil companies and we talk about the shipping. It's not the oil companies that are using the oil, it's not the shipping companies that are using the goods, it's us.
Exactly.
It's people of the world and the industry of the world.
and it's the way we live our lives on a daily basis. So it's our responsibility to be able, and we have to think about what we do on an everyday basis, and we have to think about the requirements that we do, and can we do things better, and try and minimise where we can. And they're the things that will have an impact, and those are the things that will help conserve these species into the future.
After almost a day's sailing, we're still only halfway to the shelf edge when the weather darkens. Atlantic swells begin to rise, and we're left with no option but to run for home.